Okay. Okay.
You guys might want to mute yourself on your end there.
Recording.
Hello, folks, and thank you for joining me at this webinar called Bears Everywhere, where we'll be discussing aspects from the incident response that was performed at the Democratic National Committee in 2016, as well as some of the unique tactics, techniques, and procedures that were leveraged by the adversaries and some actions you can take to protect your own networks from intrusions by these actors. My name is Ryan McCombs, the slightly overweight gentleman in the photo, and I'm a security consultant with CrowdStrike Services. I had the pleasure of being the technical analyst on the ground at the DNC. And prior to my time at CrowdStrike, I was a Department of Defense civilian, most recently with the United States Marine Corps, where I performed digital forensics and incident response as a cyber network operator. Prior to that, I was also a cybersecurity engineer with the Navy at the Space and Naval Warfare Systems Center in San Diego. So our agenda for today is as follows. First, I'll discuss the players involved at the DNC breach to include both the adversaries and the defenders. Next, I'll dive deep into the investigation, the specific TTPs used by the adversaries, and the activities that CrowdStrike conducted to illuminate the activity. In that deep dive, I'll discuss some of the more technical aspects, so just bear with me if that's not your cup of tea, and we'll be sure to talk at a more approachable level. And then I'll touch on the remediation effort at the DNC and the actions that we took to prevent recompromise. And finally, I'll wrap up the talk by highlighting some of the key learnings from the engagement and some recommendations for you all moving forward to protect yourselves from adversaries such as these. So first, just touch on the players involved, starting with the good guys. These three separate groups within CrowdStrike are typically engaged during an incident response, and this was true for the DNC breach. The groups consist of Falcon Overwatch, CrowdStrike Services, and Falcon Intel. And these groups work in conjunction to fully scope the impact of a breach. Overwatch provides a current view of the system through 24/7 monitoring of our Falcon Host endpoint solution, which gives visibility into the network and any ongoing activity by an adversary. Services, which I'm a part of, interfaces with the client, performs triage and forensics, other DFIR type activities, coordinates remediation activities that are necessary to get the client back to standard business operations. Our intelligence group aids the consultants and services by reverse engineering suspicious samples collected from customer environments and providing attribution, if available, of said samples. Each group played an instrumental part in finding and identifying the adversary activity in the DNC network. So moving on to the bad guys, we'll start with Cozy Bear. Also known as APT29 or Dukes, Cozy Bear targets multiple business verticals. And I could list them all off, but it would probably take me too long, and I don't think that that's a good use of time, but basically they target everybody. They have a wide swath of victims that they like to target, and they typically gain entry into victim networks through spear phishing campaigns. An example of a previous campaign was the Office Monkeys campaign back in 2014, and they use very well-crafted and stealthy tools and techniques as their main goal is intelligence collection, very similar to the United States NSA. The earliest activity that CrowdStrike has attributed to Cozy Bear went all the way back to 2012. And now on to Fancy Bear, also known as APT28 or SOFACI. If you thought you were safe from Fancy Bear because you're not a government or military organization, you'd be wrong. If your organization has any government contracts as a part of the defense industrial base or a think tank, it's possible you will or have been targeted by Fancy Bear. Similarly to Cozy Bear, Fancy Bear leverages spear phishing campaigns, but they also like to use spoofed websites to collect credentials from visiting victims to be used to gain entry into those networks. They are also leveraging very well-crafted tools and TTPs. In particular, they like to use X-Agent and X-Tunnel, and we'll get into those tools later on in the talk. CrowdStrike also has identified activity with this actor going back to 2012. So next, let's dive deep into the investigation that CrowdStrike performed at the Democratic National Committee. So hypothetically, what should you do if a law enforcement organization contacts your company and tells you there's a dupe in the network? You pull out your handy-dandy WMI script. When CrowdStrike was called in by the Democratic National Committee in the spring of 2016, we did just that. We executed this WMI script that you see in front of you across the entire DNC environment in search of Cozy Bear. We simultaneously deployed the CrowdStrike EDR solution, Falcon Host, along with a custom-built forensics triage capability. The deployment of our CrowdStrike toolset is standard in an incident response, mainly so that Overwatch can begin to perform their magic as early in the process as possible. We want to get eyes on the endpoints early and often. But let's get back to the WMI script. What this script does is query the WMI repository for permanent WMI event subscriptions, which are a common and well-documented persistence mechanism used by Cozy Bear. This script is also available at the CrowdStrike blog in the link provided on the slide here. And once we executed the script at the DNC, the results were absolutely telling. So what you're seeing here is the result of the WMI script run on a DNC system infected with Cozy Bear's SEADADDY backdoor. So for those of you that are unfamiliar with SEADADDY, this is one of the well-crafted tools that's used by Cozy Bear, and it gives them the ability to perform multiple actions, such as collecting and deleting files, running Mimikatz for credential harvesting, and providing Cozy Bear with a command line interface to your system. And there's a few things to note about this output. As you can see, it's structured into 3 different columns. The event filter, the left column, it contains a timed execution of the SEADADDY backdoor. The event consumer in the middle column shows a path to the SEADADDY binary with the file name. In this case, you'll see it as pagemgr.exe. And the filter to consumer binding on the right ties the actions performed by the event filter to the binary identified in the event consumer. Basically, you need the filter to consumer binding. In this instance, it says, execute this binary at this time. That's all it does. And we can see something similar here on another infected system from the DNC with one glaring difference. There is no binary resident in the event consumer, that middle column. But instead, you see a base64 encoded PowerShell command. This encoded PowerShell command is simply a bootstrap that calls an encrypted Cozy Bear created WMI class, decrypts it, and then executes the data in the class. So what exactly are we dealing with? We know Cozy Bears in the DNC environment. These TTPs and these tool sets are 100% attributed to them many times over the last couple of years. So we have SEADADDY, with this version in particular being compiled with PI2EXE. And one interesting thing for defenders with, that come across SEADADDY is that you're actually able to easily reverse the binary back to the Python source code. And if this action is taken, which we'll walk through here in a minute, you'll discover that the various persistence mechanisms available, such as linked startup, registry, and what we saw before, WMI persistence. Also, you'll see a self-destruct function, which amusingly is named seppuku. If you don't know what seppuku is, it's the ritualistic suicide performed by a Japanese samurai. So you'll also see a process used by SEADADDY to encrypt its communication and the command and control domains or IP addresses used for those communications. Great IOCs to collect and continue to span across your environment in the hopes of detecting further Cozy Bear activity. And lastly, with the sample that we saw previously, the one that we collected here at the DNC, the WMI event filter was set to execute SEADADDY between 200 and 320 seconds after the system starts. So onto the WMI bootstrap implant. This one-line base64 encoded PowerShell command calls a malicious WMI class and establishes an encrypted connection to Cozy Bear command and control infrastructure, where they can download additional PowerShell modules. And these modules, which are executed in memory, can perform virtually any function on the affected Windows system. So for example, Cozy Bear leveraged the PowerShell version of Mimikatz credential dumper to facilitate credential acquisition for lateral movement purposes. The event filter associated with this implant found at the DNC was set to execute the encoded PowerShell command every Sunday through Thursday at midnight UTC. So you can really see between these two samples the flexibility that Cozy Bear had in terms of execution of their backdoors. So let's walk through the process to reverse SEADADDY. It may seem daunting, but it's actually fairly trivial. And we know that this version of SEADADDY is compiled with PyDeXD. Well, fortunately for us, there's an open source tool called unpy.exe that we're going to leverage. And you'll see here on the screen the help output of unpy.exe, as well as the actual execution against a SEADADDY backdoor. But the resulting output is just a bunch of gobbledygook. What are we looking at? This means nothing to really anybody. Well, the reason for that is unpy.exe only extracts .pyc from an executable, and pyc files contain compiled bytecode of Python source files. And the Python source files are what we're trying to get at. That's where all the goodies are in terms of the operation that Cozy Bear is conducting. So how do you get those source files from this Python bytecode? So we'll leverage another open source tool to be able to do this called uncompile2, which is a Python 2.7 bytecode decompiler, in order to convert this Python bytecode back into equivalent Python source files. And we execute, and you'll see on the screen that this was a success. Huzzah! Awesome, we have source files. But wait, we're not done yet. That doesn't look like any Python code that I know. Well, that's because it's been obfuscated. And there are many capabilities out there to obfuscate Python, including PyObfuscate, OQY, or others. Outside of that, you can actually use a different compiler like Nuitka or Shedskin, but we've gotten lucky. You see the exec statement highlighted in the picture here? Well, what that does, so what does the Python reference manual have to say about an exec statement? So this statement supports dynamic execution of Python code, and the first expression should evaluate to either a string, an object file, an open file object, or a code object. If it is a string, the string is parsed as a suite of Python statements, which is then executed. If it is an open file, the file is parsed until end of file and executed. If it is a code object, it is simply executed. I'm sensing a theme here. Something is getting executed, and I want to know what. And fortunately for us, this is really simple to find out. By simply replacing or commenting out that exec statement, then actually printing the contents of the variable, we're able to finally get the source. And you see the source on the right-hand side. And that's more like it. The only other nuisance remaining is the obscene length and randomness of variable names. But a simple replacing of the variable names with your own will make it so much simpler to read. And this will be able to give you a lot of indicators and an understanding of the operations that Cozy Bear is conducting with their SEADADDY backdoor. So let's circle back and take a deeper look at the WMI Bootstrap implant. And it'd be great to extract some IOCs from this as well. But let's take the base64 encoded string and decode it. A portion of that decoded output can be found here on this slide. So what you're seeing here in this code is basically the Bootstrap is looking for a WMI class called WMI, a property of that class called WMI, and the value of that property. Once some conversions and decrypting occur, the value contained in the WMI class property is executed via the invoke expression command seen here. So in the event that your eyes glazed over on that last slide, the key thing to know is that from this Bootstrap, we can recover the entirety of the Cozy Bear backdoor. This is done by simply commenting out an invoke expression and replacing it with right host. So saving the code to a PowerShell script such as cozybearbackdoor.ps1 and executing the script while piping the results to a file will show you everything, including the command and control infrastructure, passwords to decrypt exfiltrated data by Cozy Bear, and other goodies as well. So what can you and your defenders do to illuminate and protect yourself from this type of activity? Well, first, it's highly recommended that you upgrade your PowerShell logging. Windows 7 and Windows 2008 come pre-installed with PowerShell 2.0, which provides very little evidence of adversary activity. But what it does show is that PowerShell is executed, the start and end times of the sessions, whether the session was executed locally or remotely. Upgrading to PowerShell 5.0 provides that information plus so much more, such as executed PowerShell commands and scripts, deobfuscated code, output and transcripts of any of the activity. Also, you should think about incorporating the WMI script that we had previously shown into your security operations. It couldn't hurt. And lastly, if your organization does not already have this capability in place, look into a spear phishing protection technology, say something like Proofpoint. This will help protect your organization against an initial intrusion by Cozy Bear. As we stated before, Cozy Bear really likes to leverage spear phishing campaigns, and some of them are extremely robust. The link provided here will actually give you a very detailed look into one of those campaigns. So we have all of this Cozy Bear activity found during the triage portion of the investigation, and it's great. But the DNC wanted to know what, if anything, was taken from their environment. So we began to perform forensics on the affected systems. We found that Cozy Bear began their activities in the summer of 2015. So that's a major setback in terms of performing forensics. Outside of the fact that we're looking at evidence nearly 9 months after the fact, so most of the forensic data had rolled off the affected systems, Cozy Bear likes to leverage the sysinternals tool sdelete. And this tool provides a secure deletion of files, which eradicates typical forensics artifacts left on the system. But sdelete does leave behind a trace of its execution in an excellent forensics artifact known as shimcache. So we weren't able to determine, based on these setbacks, where patient 0 was, but due to the time frame of that first activity, we can conjecture that the DNC possibly fell victim to the EFAC spear phishing campaign performed by Cozy Bear in 2015. But we also saw something else strange in shimcache on these systems affected by Cozy Bear. There was an oddly named binary that was executed in the spring of 2016. Well, when searching across the rest of the DNC environment for similarly named binaries, we found numerous random 4 alpha character service names with random 8 alpha character service binaries sitting in system root. It took us a while not knowing what these services were, but after looking at the named pipes on the systems affected by these services, we were able to conveniently find something interesting. Notice the string REMCOM. Open source research on REMCOM brought us to the REMCOM project page on GitHub, which explains that REMCOM is an open source PSExec replacement. This is really clever by the attacker, since a lot of security solutions are only looking for execution of PSExec. Well, from my knowledge on Cozy Bear to this point, I wasn't aware that they used REMCOM in their operations. So I picked up the bat phone to call our Intel shop to see what they had to say. So who is using REMCOM? Do we have another actor in the environment at the DNC? Well, in short, Cozy Bear doesn't use REMCOM. The DNC administrators didn't use REMCOM. Well, even though Cozy Bear was active in the environment, Overwatch was watching their PowerShell activities while the services consultants were performing forensics. The lack of intel on this tool and the fact that it didn't begin executing in the environment until spring of 2016 made us feel that we had another actor involved. So we pivoted off of REMCOM execution time frame for all unsigned binaries that had executed in the environment via shimcache analysis. Simultaneously, we stacked against unsigned files residing in the execution directory for REMCOM, in this case, C Windows. And the results were very interesting, needless to say. We pulled back these 2 files in particular, vmupgradehelper.exe and twain_64.dll. Any good analyst will do open source research on a binary before they can go through the effort of reverse engineering a sample. And we searched for these 2 hashes in VirusTotal to see if they had ever been submitted. And surprisingly, VirusTotal provided back no results. And this was extremely interesting, as most VMware-related files and files residing in Windows system root are typically found in VirusTotal. So at this point, we have no idea what this is, and we decided to pass off the binaries to our Falcon Intel team to reverse engineer and analyze the samples. And what they came back with, blew the doors wide open in the investigation. So we've now found these two main tools, and they are only attributed to Fancy Bear, XAgent and XTunnel. XAgent is a well-crafted remote access Trojan with registry persistence, giving Fancy Bear the ability to perform a litany of functions, such as keystroke logging, the ability to view, create, and modify files and registry entries, create or kill processes, execute arbitrary commands via a shell-like interface, exfiltrate credentials, and I could go on. CrowdStrike Intelligence has found that no other actor uses this tool, as I stated. We also have XTunnel, which provides Fancy Bear the ability to communicate with infected hosts behind an added gateway, thus bridging the gap that firewalls are typically meant to impose. XTunnel maintains its persistence via the registry, just like XAgent, and enables Fancy Bear the ability to communicate over an encrypted channel as well. So you'll see here an example of XAgent persistence. The important thing to note is that the value shows that XAgent is executed via run DLL 32. This should really give you a good indication of suspicious DLLs when you're searching for all execution of run DLL 32 across your environment. We did also find evidence of staging for exfiltration of data by Fancy Bear. So in this instance, it was a large archive, gigabytes in size, that was created during the same time window as the rest of the Fancy Bear activity. We were also able to find evidence of exfiltration commands when we analyzed the page file of affected systems. Well, in all honesty, analyzing pagefile.sys is a crapshoot, but we got lucky. Windows uses this paging file to store frames of memory that's not currently fit into physical memory. So inside, we were able to find a portion of the command executed by Fancy Bear to exfiltrate data. However, we weren't able to determine when that command had been executed. So at this point, we've got two nation-state actors in the environment. Many organizations who have dealt with these actors previously have spent a significant amount of time and resources to eradicate them from their networks. Well, this is the Democratic National Committee during an election cycle, during a presidential election cycle. You know, they have the flexibility of resources, funding, and the fact that they are small to be extremely aggressive in remediation. This coordinated remediation event consisted of imaging all of the systems within the network and standing up a new untainted domain, implementing new security controls to prevent recompromise, and this was all done in the course of a weekend. This is the nuclear option. This is something that not all organizations are able to accomplish, but in this circumstance, it was possible and effective. And to be sure, foreign intelligence organizations are going to attempt to regain entry into the network just so that they can meet their operational requirements. But just bear with me, and I've got an amusing anecdote from the DNC engagement about this remediation event. So if any of you are familiar with political organizations, you may know, but for the rest of you, personnel turnover rates in political organizations are extremely high, 95%. Especially during key moments in election cycles or just after. So this event happened during the presidential election cycle after all, and knowing this, the only information being passed to DNC employees, because we wanted to keep a tight lid on it, was turn your laptop in on Friday. And the poor souls working at the DNC all thought they were going to get fired. Not until the subsequent Monday did they learn their actual fates when they received their new equipment. But this is a good reminder, at least to me, that this game isn't all about finding and booting out bad guys, but getting an organization back to business as it affects the business as a whole, and especially in this case at the Democratic National Committee. So many of the items that we're about to discuss under this section, they're not groundbreaking, but I feel it's important to continue to stress these recommendations because these recommendations may not completely remove the risk your environment faces from the likes of a cozy bear or a fancy bear, but they will help you mitigate the impact of an intrusion. So some technology recommendations are included here. Every network should have an EDR solution, such as Falcon Host, to provide visibility into every endpoint in your environment. And this will aid in preventing processes and methods leveraged by CEADADDY, XAgent, XTunnel, other backdoors before the bad guys are able to even utilize them. Also, think about augmenting your IT staff or your internal security team with 24/7 adversary hunting, such as what Falcon Overwatch is able to provide. So this is especially useful if your budget cannot maintain your security operations center or your SOC isn't a 24/7 shop. So if you don't have one already, a SIEM solution for log aggregation and storage will really help you out. Your team needs to have the ability to get a record of events happening so that they can backtrack and analyze any incident. And lastly, look into a network traffic alerting and collection platform. Understanding what's traversing the wire will alert your team to anomalous or malicious activity. From the policy side, not every user should have administrative rights on their machine. Allow me to rephrase in the same way. Not every user should have administrative rights on their machine. By restricting these privileged accounts, you may prevent a widespread compromise within your environment. Also, harden all of your workstations. NIST 800-53 is a great resource to be able to choose and select mitigating strategies on your endpoints. Also, make sure that an endpoint protection product is installed on all of your hosts, not just on some of them. Complete coverage is critical. And lastly, scrutinize third-party access to your environment. Third parties, can include vendors, contractors, partners, anyone that's not employed by you but has access to your environment. They present a risk. For example, say one of your vendors has their network compromised and a vendor employee has VPN access into your network. The ability for that adversary to move laterally into your network would not be out of the question and impossible. And with that, I want to thank you for attending this Bears Everywhere webinar. Please reach out to me if you have any questions. Thank you.